All right, my wonderful students. This short little video will be about the Harappan Civilization, India's first civilization. In our textbook, it'll be over pages 146 through 149. You can see that right there. So if you're interested in reading similar information, maybe a little bit more, you can look at those textbooks. But again, this will be about the Harappan Civilization, so let's dive right in. Now, we have already looked at India's geography. To the left here, you can see this map. You can see the Himalayas right there. Oh, let's use a brighter color. You can see the Himalayas right there. There is the Ghats right there. And then you have the three major rivers located on here. You have the Brahmaputra, you have the Ganges River right here, and then the Indus, which is over here in modern-day Pakistan. Pakistan is this country here. And the Indus River is over here. And this is where the very first civilization in India was created. We don't know a whole lot about this civilization, and we'll get into that in a moment. But the very first discoveries of this civilization occurred at a city in modern-day Pakistan called Harappa. And if we look at the map on the right, it's found right here. So that's where the Harappan civilization gets its name, where we first discovered the remnants of an old city near the current city in Pakistan called Harappa. So we called it the Harappan civilization. There have been a few other finds, discoveries, archaeological discoveries, dating to the Harappan civilization. One of the most famous ones is the other city of Mohenjo-Daro. But there's been a whole bunch of others kind of sprinkled around in this area. And so from that, we kind of figure out that the Harappan civilization was very advanced, and we'll look at that in a bit, but also pretty large. Look at the area that it pretty much covered. There's parts of modern-day India. There's a good chunk of actually almost all of Pakistan today, and this is actually the country of Afghanistan, and this is Iran over here. These are modern-day countries. Here's India. So there has been, there was a lot that the Harappan civilization covered, a lot of space and land, and it centered around the Indus River, and it was found in the Indus River Valley. So let's move on. So the first cities in India, the first cities, the cities that we know the most about were Harappa. Again, here's that same map. Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro. These are the kind of the best preserved cities. They are about 300 miles apart, but they are very, very similar, which tells us that the society was pretty much the same. Like the Harappan civilization covered that distance, that 300 miles. And this civilization was, we figure, is about 2,300. That's what the textbook says. Other people say it's even earlier. But started about 2,300 BCE, so almost 4,000 years ago. And it lasted to about 1,700 BCE. Now these cities, they are extremely well planned. They have kind of a grid-like roads. So like these blue lines that I just drew, these would be the roads, and so they would be like in the shape of a grid, not necessarily a tic-tac-toe board, but kind of like modern-day cities today. So there's a lot of organization in these cities here, and near each city there'd be a big fortress. This fortress would be up on a hill. It would look down, so you could look down the city streets at any invaders that might be in there, and kind of protect the city that way. But there'd be a big fortress. These cities also, the streets were paved, and the streets were in that grid that I just mentioned. Sorry, and there are actually like public wells, many shops. The city was very, very advanced. Wells where you get the water. So the city is pretty advanced. Let's look at some of the other advancements of Harappa. So the achievements. I mentioned the well, and this is part well, part bathhouse here. Let's actually change colors to red. This is part well, part bathhouse, we think here. Here you could see the fortress. But this isn't it. Harappa had many, many other achievements too. They had tools. They were able to make toys and things out of clay, some advanced things. They had good weights and measures. So they had like a system for that. Like today we use pound, or the metric system here in Korea. In America they use pounds and inches and things. But Harappa had its own system for doing that. So that's pretty advanced right there. They had their own written language, but unfortunately, we still don't know how to read it. We can't read this language. We haven't found something like a Rosetta Stone or anything to kind of unlock this for us. So we don't know a whole lot about Harappan civilizations because we can't read this writing. But they did have their writing, so that's another sign of how advanced they were. Again, you can see kind of the streets here. This is the city. I believe this is Mohenjo-Daro. And so the Harappan civilization was pretty advanced, but they didn't last. In time, a people called the Aryans, they migrated into this part of India. And you can see from this map is from the textbook, just how far they migrated from. They started over here in what is called the Caucasus, and they eventually, over many, many hundreds of years, made it to India. This is the location of Harappa, the Harappan civilization, this area that I'm circling. They eventually made it there. Now the Aryans were a bit different. They were nomadic, which means they just kind of traveled. They brought all their stuff with them. They were constantly moving. But they were very skilled warriors, and they used things called chariots. You might remember from Egypt, chariots as part of their army. So they had advanced weaponry, advanced tactics in war, and so that made them, pretty formidable. They were able to conquer the Harappan civilization, we think. They also had a different religion, and we'll learn about that later. It's kind of the roots of the Hindu religion in many ways. But they had a collection of like songs, hymns, things that they said, poems, and these were called the Vedas. And these were stories about their history. They were sometimes stories about the battles that they fought on their way to India. And eventually they were written down. We'll get to that in a second. But these Vedas help their society organize. And I mentioned before that they were kind of the beginnings of the Hindu religion. It's all kind of connected. Now the government of the Aryans, they were different from the Harappans. Remember, the Harappans had these big advanced cities. Big advanced cities. But the Aryans, they were in more smaller communities. Remember, they're nomadic. They were nomadic people. So instead, they lived in smaller communities. So they didn't need as much government. They didn't need as much organization because they lived in smaller towns. But slowly, they stopped being nomadic and they started living in these towns. So they do need some leader. And what they ended up having was someone called a Raja. A Raja. And normally this is, someone who's a little bit older, probably a skilled warrior. And they would be the leader of this small community. And these small communities, sometimes they would work together, sometimes they wouldn't. Sometimes they might even fight each other. But the Rajas were the leaders of these small towns. Now together, all of the Aryans had a similar language. And that language was called Sanskrit. It's right here. It's the most important language of ancient India, because as the Aryans came in and they took over, this language spread around India, and it became kind of the basic ancient Indian language. Now, at first, the Aryans did not have a written language. This Sanskrit language was only spoken at first. So the Vedas, they were spoken in Sanskrit, and And so at first there was only spoken word, but eventually the Aryans and the later civilizations, they started to write this down, write Sanskrit down, and so today the Vedas are still around, yeah, still around, because they were written down. We still know the ancient Vedas because they were written down. Let's move on. Now, to finish your notes, I feel like you need to write down about 5 review questions. This would be again, if you have Cornell notes, this would be in the left side column. All of the notes that you just took should be over here. Write your questions in that left-hand column. Any vocab words, so things like Vedas, Raja, you can put over there too. After you've done that, finish your summary. Please finish your summary. Now for homework, you need to go back into your notes. You can watch this video again, but you need to answer these 2 questions right here and on a separate piece of paper and bring them in to me. That'll be your homework check. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed it.